Moving forward, I welcome you to the Supporting the Transition from High School to University using Kurzweil 3000, hosted by the Network of Assistive Technologists. And we ask that you add your questions to the chat, and there will be a Q&A at the end, and the replay link and handouts will be available shortly after the event. We're joined today from Bridges Canada by Iain Wallace, their sales manager, and the Director of International Sales from Kurzweil Education, Will Skeels. Our primary presenter today will be Linda Petty, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience in supporting people with a range of disabilities in achieving their goals, utilizing assistive technology. Linda worked with students with physical, cognitive, and mental health conditions, among others, during her over 20-year tenure as an assistive technology consultant and clinical specialist at the University of Toronto. Linda is also an active member of the Network of Assistive Technologists. So again, just a reminder, the captioning is provided courtesy of Streamer today as we test out their services. The instructions are on the screen as well as listed in the chat window if anybody needs to access that live captioning. So at this point, I'd like to hand over the presentation for supporting the transition from high school to university using Kurzweil 3000 to Linda.
This is the first slide. One of the reasons why we wanted to bring this information forward is obviously to talk about transition to university, because that's a huge issue for so many 17, 18-year-olds, much less those with disabilities, but also because of actions that Kurzweil and other companies are taking at the moment. So Will, if you want to address this.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, yes, so we're trying to help support the entire spectrum of students with reading, note-taking, studying, writing and test-taking needs, whatever devices they have available to them as they distance learn. So as you can see at the top there, we're making this free to parents and students for the duration of this COVID-19 crisis. Obviously, there's not a specific end date for that, so we'll keep adjusting that out as necessary to support the folks who need it. But that's not the whole story either. That's not going to be a ton of good to especially parents who are new to this and trying to help their sons and daughters. So we're as the normal has changed very rapidly in the last few months, we've devised some quick help guides for parents and educators to fast track the learning support for them. And we're running frequent webinars on a variety of topics related to Kurzweil 3000. Those are weekly right now for the next couple months. But the important thing to me is not just that we're doing them live and people have the opportunity to ask questions and have them answered, but that they can go review those on our YouTube page whenever they'd like. There's a playlist there for our weekly webinars. And of course, we have all the resources we've always had and will continue to create available at Kurzweil Academy too. Links to these are also on the last slide. I'll spelled out so it's a little bit easier to get to them if you can't click the hyperlinks here.
Great, thank you. So my contact info is at the bottom of this slide. And also I'm available through the listserv, the N.O.A.T listserv. So we wanted to talk about not all the hurdles between transitioning from high school to university, but especially a number of the academic ones, and just different ways that you can utilize the web license of Kurzweil 3000 to help accommodate students, to help them make this transition effectively. Let's face it, any 17, 18-year-old can hit university with all good intentions and great parental support or whatever, and still bomb out within their first term. And then when you layer onto that learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, depression, anxiety, brain injuries, all of these other things, it becomes increasingly difficult. One of the biggest problems, one of the biggest transitions, not problems, but differences between high school and university is volume of reading. So students encounter 50 pages per subject per week. So if you're taking the normal course load of 5 courses, you are talking about reading 250 pages a week. And that isn't light reading. It's not reading Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. It's reading very dense material full of information, often full of new terminology, new vocabulary. So again, people struggle with vocabulary in areas, courses they've never taken before, linguistics, anthropology, so on and so forth. So there's struggles with the unfamiliar subjects and the vocabulary. The other issue can be the multiple settings, so that potentially a student would have a laptop or a tablet as well, of course, as the ubiquitous phone, but they're on campus. They don't necessarily want to haul everything around with them all of the time. So you're looking at multiple settings to manage this volume of reading. You're commuting. I worked the east side of U of T, the Scarborough campus, for a number of years, and it was huge, the amount of time people spent commuting. And it might be a half an hour to an hour driving. It might be 2 hours on the subway and bus system. It might be an hour on the commuter bus. So it varied quite a bit, and the student's ability to use that time effectively varied quite a bit too. So it's not so easy to say cart a textbook with you, especially if you've got 5 textbooks. And trying to use that time effectively becomes really important in your studies and in managing that volume of reading. So another issue is new ways of studying and learning, because in high school there is a tendency to memorize, to have general awareness of what you're being taught, but not necessarily that you're doing reading, say, of a textbook, to be able to really understand the material in depth, to be able to interpret the material, and to be able to apply it to other situations and scenarios. And many students think that, oh, well, if it's a multiple choice test, exam, that it's a no-brainer, that it's just going to be that you memorize material and the answer will be A, B, C, or D. But actually, those multiple choice questions are phrased so that you have to demonstrate essentially your understanding of the material and how it would be applied in a new setting. Another difference is the independent access, because many students that are supported in a high school environment have an educational assistant, a special ed resource teacher, other people who provide materials for them so that their reading materials are provided, loaded on their laptop or loaded on the Kurzweil server, just ready for them to go and get them when it's appropriate. So it's certainly not that way at a university level. We do have a far better system now for making textbook material accessible and in a very timely way, but that doesn't include everything else that comes across your plate from the course load management software, from professors, from other classmates, and so on. So the student needs to be able to be independent then in suddenly making this material into something that they can read, understand, and work with. Similarly, many students have minimal or not enough experience with writing, and with writing at a university level. So they would do a 3-paragraph essay or a 3-page essay. It's certainly not the level of writing expected at a university level, and so they struggle with how to brainstorm or outline that, how to connect reading with writing, how to create bibliographies, and so on. And I'd say most students would struggle with that. But again, with Kurzweil 3000, we have ways of supporting those needs, integrating those needs, and making it more feasible for the students. And just as a note, there are other things that are not included in this workshop. The big one in transition is time management. And that could easily be an hour in itself, how to manage your time, how to manage your motivation so that you successfully complete your academic year. So we won't be going into that today, and that's a major omission. So what I'm going to do now is toggle over to Kurzweil and flip to another page. So this is, I presume you're all familiar with Kurzweil. That's maybe a jump, but anyway, that's what I'm presuming starting into this workshop. So with the student, you're going to discuss with them the volume of reading and how important it is to stay caught up rather than to catch up just at final exam time or to never catch up, which happens. And there are a range of different voices available. If I'm seeing a male student, I usually start with a guy's voice, female, a female voice, and you want to work with them around what is best for them. What are the best settings for them to be able to hear and understand and not have it too fast, too slow. So I usually start out with just that process.
Linda, I think your computer audio is not sharing. If you want it to, if you go back into your, I think on the bottom of, or on your toolbar, you should see 3 dots that for more. Yeah. And on there, I think there should be an option near the bottom that says to share computer audio.
Thank you. Let's try that again.
Repeated, but those that produce unfavorable consequences tend not to recur. In other words, we learn from experience.
So did that come through, Doug?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So this might not be familiar to students. You have to get their head around that, yes, it's a little different from what they're used to. It's a synthetic voice, but play with the voices, find one that works for you. And in particular, you have to work on this issue of you have to master the volume. So at 175 words per minute, you're obviously going to be going at a fair clip. On the other hand, you teach them you can't go so fast and then just tick the box and say, well, I read chapter 1. Because if you don't get something out of it, then the whole purpose is defeated. You can't go through reading at a university level to just end up with an impression of it. So we then discuss how to adjust this. So for example, if somebody is really tired, it's near the end of the day or end of the night, you might want to change the reading settings to self-paced and then also just by sentence.
Behavior is similarly selected. Behaviors that produce favorable consequences are repeated, but those that produce unfavorable consequences tend not to recur.
Click the button.
In other words, we learn from experience.
So that you get that chance every sentence or every paragraph to ensure that, yes, I got that. Yes, I'm thinking about that. And yes, it makes sense to me. So it's active rather than passive, because text to speech can be fairly passive. It's important for them to learn how they can mess with the settings rather than just leave them nonstop, and be able to benefit from that to enhance their understanding. So something very complex, you slow it down, you slow the speech down, and you slow down you make it self-paced at a pace you can manage. Something that's not complex, that's a no-brainer, you crank the speed up and just sit back and listen and watch. But again, you don't want passive learning, because passive learning almost essentially doesn't happen. So you use the various tools that are available to mark up the text. So when you're first coming to your chapter, your goal is not just to tick the box, I read the chapter, but rather to find the most important parts that you need to learn out of this chapter. And so for a student, so you use the highlights, and I've modified my highlighting settings so that yellow then shows as key term, and green shows up as definition, and blue as example. And as I read, I'll maybe stop after the first chunk, then go back and highlight the different sections so that I can get highlight the meaningful text, the important text, the things I need to learn out of this. So that again ensures that the student is being an active learner, not a passive one. And similarly, you can use sticky notes or text notes or voice notes so that you can make comments to yourself as you go through. You're annotating your text, and also rather than scribbling on a piece of paper, you're putting it actually on the material itself so it won't be lost. And if you choose, you can extract then the not just the highlights, but also the notes, and come up with a document that includes those sticky notes and so on and so forth. So for some students that might be helpful, for others it might not. What I find the best though is to use the highlights, so you're actively highlighting as you go along, page by page. You reach a point where you have to stop reading, or a good point to stop reading, and you extract. I've put it as a button on the toolbar, which you can do, extract the highlights into column notes. So these three I put in the first two columns to leave the third column free. So this is part of, and no, I'm gonna do a new one. So this is part of the transition to learning, reading and studying to actually learn, understand, and interpret, rather than memorize, get the things that are going to be in the fill in the blank test. So when you go to study, it's relatively simple because here's the material right here.
Learning an adaptive process in which the tendency to perform a particular behavior is changed by experience.
To stop there. Yes, these are great study notes, and in reading, reviewing, listening to these before your next test, you're likely to retain this information.
Habituation, learning not to respond to an unimportant event that occurs repeatedly, is one of the simplest forms of learning.
That you'll see demonstrated in the Cornell note-taking method and by Cura and other educational specialists, is that what you need to do at this point to really show your understanding is to think of something you already know and write it in your own words, give your own examples of this. So for example, oh, sorry.
Habituation is a form of learning. It means tuning out what isn't important or threatening. Like the dishwasher running.
Noise. at the moment. So by doing this, by extracting the important things from the chapter and then writing it up in your own words, providing your own examples, students actually can learn the material more effectively. They can work with the material, make sure they actually understand it and can apply it. So they can give an example of classical conditioning, unconditional stimuli, and so on and so forth. This also becomes a study tool. So if you right-click, you can then cover that second column, test yourself, performance. What is performance? Habituation, what is it? And so on. Or similarly, the third column. You can also copy this to the clipboard in an Excel format and import it into your flashcards software. So bring it into an app that you use for flashcards, and then you get the performance on one card, and then you test yourself and move on to the definitions and then your definition. So it's very flexible as far as written material. The big bonus is the student didn't write it themselves. They didn't write notes out on the chapter. They didn't highlight and color coding, but it's still in the chapter and they're madly flipping through trying to find the important parts. It becomes a separate file that you then save as your study notes, chapter 1, psych, or whatever format. And I encourage students to use lots of folders so that they stay organized. So they could save it to their Google Drive, or they could save it to the Kurzweil cloud, or they could save it to the hard drive of their individual system. So the benefit with using the cloud, either Google, the Google Drive, or your own folder on the Kurzweil cloud, is that it's very easy to then make chapters for, oh, no capitals allowed, pardon me. No spaces allowed. Underscores allowed. Reminds me of DOS. Anyone else remember those days? Dating myself. So you've got a new chapter and we call this chapter 1. So you stay organized. You can find those notes when you want them. And you're good to go. So that chapter by chapter, you're actually on top of the material and you've learned it well. And ideally, in time management, the student learns, you read that chapter, you create those notes before you walk into the lecture that's on that particular topic. So again, you're way ahead. And when you listen to the prof discuss different types of learning, you're listening to it from a perspective of someone that has the background, has a bunch of the knowledge, and now can in turn grow that knowledge and gain more information. So this is a real asset in being able to actively learn, being able to not spend a lot of time creating notes, and yet maximize what you learn from those notes. This is also compatible with Dragon Naturally Speaking. So your third column, you could fill up using Dragon rather than typing into that. Now, another thing that's important is this ability to be able to keep reading, keep working, no matter where you are or what kind of technology is available to you. So if the student is in an environment where they have internet access, they can use, let me just get to that. Sorry, let me just see. There we go. So they can bring up the same document they've been working on at Kurzweil3000.com, log in, open the document, and keep reading. Right. So there's something screwy with this, whether I've launched too many things or whatever, or there's a dialog box open somewhere. Regardless, gives you the flexibility to keep going, keep reading, and you can also do highlighting. There's highlighting available on the web app for Kurzweil as well. My apologies, I've maybe got a few too many things open and running. So students can be on that bus and be doing their reading with headphones in and even do some highlighting, save it back to the server and be able to log out and then move again into Kurzweil when they're on campus and open from the library and bring up the document. So it gives them a lot of flexibility and a lot of ability to not get lost, to not lose material, and to not haul the textbooks around. Similarly, you can have a tablet or a laptop in an area that has no Wi-Fi access and access the same files on your hard drive and turn around and then work with them, save them back to the cloud the next time you're in a
Has anyone ever asked you if...
So again, that full flexibility of to be a commuter, to be still able to have access to your textbooks without hauling 1 or 5 in your backpack as you go. So another, I'm going to close a few files before anything starts crashing on me. Another issue that students hit is this problem of vocabulary, that they get to university and some of the terminology might not at all be something they're familiar with, that some of the subjects like ethnography and sociology, linguistics, whatever, are something they're very unfamiliar with. They haven't taken this before, and going through it is just so confusing because of the vocabulary.
The World in Pieces, Clifford Geertz, 2000, wrote that a much more pluralistic politics seemed to be emerging in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and through the rise of borderless capitalism, the growth of technology and the mobility of people, and the emergence of new centers of wealth and power. As old certainties and alliances dissolved, he wrote, we, it seems, are left with the pieces.
Often students are taking electives and subjects they're not at all familiar with. So it's good to encourage them when they encounter something that seems totally beyond their experience. Like, yes, they can certainly use the dictionary. And the dictionary is great because you can, again, listen to it.
The use of scientific knowledge to solve practical problems, especially in industry and commerce. Two, the methods.
So the benefit is you can, with your dictionary, you can pick the College Writers Dictionary, which is at a far better level than some of the other like concise English to French or whatever, the Heritage 5th edition. So go for the college level dictionary. But even so, and it's less distracting having it right there rather than going out to Google every time you don't know a word, and you get out to Google and then you do this and then you do that, and 15 minutes later you remember, oh yeah, I was trying to get through that article. So this is integrated. You just click and click, except sometimes they aren't there, but regardless, it can be a lot faster getting through. However, it could be better. So what students can do is pick a color they don't normally use for their study notes, and I've settled on orange for vocabulary. Go through and highlight those vocabulary items that they find aren't straightforward, that they don't know well. So they highlight as they go through, and then you can extract those to the vocabulary study guide. And the advantage to this is that it's all done at once and done easily. The definitions are put there for you rather than you searching for them one by one.
Culture Noun.1.
So on, so
The
forth.
arts,
And again,
beliefs.
you can listen to this. And you can build this as you go through the article, the chapter, whatever. Add more and more to your vocabulary study guide. And even using this to review can help you then with getting through the material. But you can also take that vocabulary study guide. Where'd my note snippet go? And put it into what's called a note snippet. So this means that you take any one of these things and you can have your dictionary material right there with you as you go through. So you don't have to look it up, find it, go back. It can be sort of a floating word list, a floating quick reference to what was that again. So that can be helpful. It's maybe not everybody's thing. Maybe more people would prefer to use the inline dictionary, but both are available. And you can also have this available for writing. So if you're writing, you might well want these definitions available so you can go to use a word like empirical and make sure you're using it correctly. So those are good tools to use for unfamiliar subjects and vocabulary. Now to go to writing, you can use templates that are available, and Kurzweil has a number of them that are helpful and are university level. So for example, there's a research report, there's analytical essays, and others. Get rid of that. So this allows you to move from a brainstorm view to an outline view. And then after you've gotten your pieces in place, you can then switch to your document view, or switch so that you can now here type and still see your outline and sort of work through it one to the other. One advantage is that you can make use of the text to speech. A lot of students, especially those that also have English language development layered onto this, need to hear it to know if they've made a mistake or if they've tangled the sentence up. So being able to hear it as you type is helpful. You can cut and paste things from one to another so that you can just pop it over, and it's a very flexible tool, has the spell checking and that sort of piece all in place available. So if I go to one, so analytical essay, for example, and you've got the ability to add to your brainstorm, circles, squares, whatever, join them, link them, do all of those things that you would do in a brainstorming type template. If a student has huge needs in that outlining planning piece, you might well want to go with a separate application. And we've been reviewing those through the webinars, and that's been really helpful. If it's not a huge issue for them, then you might want to be able to just do the built-in thing, because then it's very easy to move back and forth from your article straight into what you're writing about the article. And you literally copy, paste to put the information in. And then once you've got those pieces in place, you build your outline and then start writing. So again, it's a very seamless, integrated mechanism for writing that can enable students to take advantage both of listening to the texts they're assigned or that they're told that their research shows are useful for their particular essay or research project. And then they move straight into writing about them and integrating them into the writing because, of course, it's accessible text. Another issue that Kurzweil can help with is access through the material very independently. Most information in library portals, for example, is now posted in PDF form, and it becomes very easy to either go to Kurzweil and open that, save it to your hard drive and open it, or do a print. And you can print to the Kezi printer. And it's automatically moved over to Kurzweil and recognized. So it becomes a very quick and dirty way for a student to independently import all of the material that they need to write their paper or do their research. Students can bring in PDFs, JPEGs, Word documents, just about anything under the sun, and have them be readily available. One other issue that I forgot to mention when we were talking about how accessible material becomes across multiple settings is MP3 files. So if you want to listen to this while you're driving in, you obviously don't want to have it in front of you on a screen. So you can simply go to audio file, create an audio file of the entire document or whatever you want, and set your speed, and away it goes. So it becomes very easy to, again, make the most of your time in reviewing materials. So again, you become very independent in accessing text materials. I remember one student that the first weekend he had Kurzweil. On Monday, I find I got 4 emails about, I'm having problems with this document or that document. And when I checked with him, no, it had all been solved. He had sorted out what he needed to do, and it was all available and in place and no problems. So again, something like this is then readily available. You can use the accessible text too with the bibliography tool. So the bibliography tool, I usually use APA, and you take the material and it's going to come from a periodical. There's the source title, and you go back and forth and fill this in. It's instead of using one of the bibliography tools that you have to pay for, you can use the built-in Kurzweil tool, and it creates your bibliography for you. So then when you're done, you save it as an RTF file, import it into Word, and again, the accessible text combined with the software features enables you to be very independent and very rapidly gain the skills you need for doing the reference work in your writing. So I think I've sped through about everything I wanted to cover. What about, I'll flip back to the slides then, and then let me just kill that. And we'll finish that and then go back to any questions. Iain, take it away.
Well, thanks so much, Linda. That was wonderful. Just to hear all your points and what you've worked with some of your students. So thank you. Again, thanks everyone for attending. What great turnout today. Hope everyone's doing well. Just to let you know, I work with Bridges Canada. Some of you may know us, others may not. We're the exclusive Kurzweil Canadian distributor. So after today, if you have any questions around the product, if you'd like to learn more about it, please reach out. Again, we'll share all my contact information. I can put you in touch with your local sales rep as well for a webinar, learn more, discuss different versions. Again, Linda was showing a lot today. She was within the Kurzweil kind of standalone version, but jumping towards the web app and how you can share things online. People want to learn more about web licensing or even just upgrading old versions, reach out and we'd be happy to help and answer any questions you have.
So there's Iain's contact, Will's contact. So this slide deck is going out or being given to Doug as a PDF. Will? So these are the links Will talked with earlier. When I work with students and I tell them, oh, there's help files and, you know, or you can go to the Kurzweil website and they have this academy, they're used to going to YouTube. They ask a question on YouTube, or so there's a Kurzweil 3000 channel on YouTube, and hopefully they'll be posting lots of higher ed materials. But for educators and AT people, the Academy is also very helpful. That's where you've got a lot of professional material that's been stored and made accessible to you over quite a period of time. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Doug.
Great, thank you, Linda, and thank you as well, Iain, for that additional information, and Will for the slides and the information up front regarding what your organization is able to help support us through the through our current COVID-19 times. So lots of great information there, Linda. I appreciate you taking us through some of the features that most of us as assistive technologists or those working with students with disabilities, we generally don't get an opportunity to get into those many or that many features and those extra nooks and crannies of Kurzweil. We find ourselves always going for the basics, and a lot of the time I think it's because we're not sure of exactly how to apply some of those additional and extended sets of features, especially with the different platforms that are available out there now with Kurzweil, and opening up the opportunities through those different platforms. So that's great to have your insights shared with us. Really appreciate it. And using a Kurzweil terminology here, I'm sure it's only a snippet of what you could share. So I appreciate you sharing your information there earlier in the webinar, and that will go out with the replay as well, so that if people do have some questions in follow-up to the material you presented today. So just want to take a second here, and there's been a couple of questions that have come in through the chat window, and I know that excuse me, I know that Iain was diligent at responding to them, but for those who may not have access to the chat, if they're not on a computer or a tablet, or if there's any kind of a visual impairment where they're relying on just audio, I'd like to just to do a quick synopsis of them. We had a question for about what if you don't have the network or web app, and the response from Iain was that most of the features Linda has demonstrated are available in all versions of Kurzweil 3000, the standalone network or web license. The only features that are only available with a web license, with a web license, is the cloud storage and the web app. So we did receive another inquiry here about whether or not all students who have Kurzweil use this web, or are able to use this web app, or is it only available for certain licenses and Kurzweil versions? And the similar response there, part of the response is similar there, where the web app is only available with a Kurzweil 3000 web license. Linda just demonstrated the web app on her computer, but and this is an interesting and important point. The web app can also be accessed on any device with a web browser, including tablets and smartphones. So even though Linda was demonstrating it today just on her computer, for the sake of this webinar, just please be aware that you can access that web app on other devices effectively if you're connected to the internet.
I think that a lot of students prefer that. So if you're on a bus and maybe you're standing up, but you've got your headphones in and your phone, you can then watch the highlight move while you listen to the text and get another 10 pages read while you do that leg of your run. So the flexibility of the phone to the computer, and save it back to the cloud, open it up in a computer lab or the library, save it back to the cloud, go home, extract your highlights at home and work with them in a quiet environment. Like that's really important flexibility to maximize the use of time.
Exactly, and very valid point there, Linda, of maximizing the use of your time. Something that we unfortunately have an awful lot on our hands right now, but once we're back to the, I hate to say the old way of doing things, but was it that we shouldn't do things the same way just because we've done it that way for 40 years? But at this point in the times of COVID-19 quarantine and closures, I think that's kind of a welcome thing to go back to. Anyways, I apologize for that little side note, but with that is, once we do go back to the way things used to be in a typical education setting and typical lifestyle, those are very very valuable tips to be able to share. And then as well, the fact that it takes it further, you're able to do more and have more of an interaction instead of just the old way of doing it, where we were where we would recommend a MP3 file to be created, and for that file to be then transferred over and side loaded onto your phone or sorry, I'm dating myself here. I'm an iPod Touch, similar to your DOS command earlier, and as Melissa has shared, DOS, CDOS, run DOS, run. I remember. So that regarding the ability to use the software on all platforms. Then we also had an additional inquiry about what version of Kurzweil is it that you were sharing your work with?
16.22. One of the things that I forgot to mention is, again, with independence for students, they can go to the online menu and check for updates. And generally, Kurzweil will do an update that improves the product once a month. So I encourage students to do that check, do that update. When it's a major one, there was a problem last year when Apple switched to Catalina, and with Catalina, it wouldn't read. It would read on the web app, but not on the desktop version. So Kurzweil was noting that on their website and saying November 15th or whatever, we will have that fixed for you. So I could then talk to students, say November 15th, and then send an email out across the student listserv to say, okay, this fix is there, please update. So that kind of independence, that they don't have to come back and see the assistive technologist to fix their computer, is priceless.
Yes, I can second that. Definitely, I second that. The final question that we had here in the chat that I think it might be actually, Will has just replied to it in the chat as well. I was going to ask us to reply live in the last few moments that we have together here today. Cindy is asking about whether it works with Red Shelf and Vital Source. Will has replied that that Kurzweil doesn't have integration with Red Shelf or Vital Source, although many of our users, the Kurzweil users, request the same files from the publishers. And for many of our users, PDF is still the preferred file type, and publishers recognize this. On a side note, that is a whole other discussion regarding alternate format and requesting from publishers and such. So I don't want to necessarily get into that at this point, but Linda, have you found any kind of tips or tricks of working with Red Shelf or Vital Source files in Kurzweil?
No, sorry.
All right, I know Kurzweil does have an EPUB function where it can open up some EPUB files, but my understanding is that sources such as Red Shelf and Vital Source aren't allowing you to download necessarily an EPUB file. They're more of a locked-in file.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You can use the image reader in Kurzweil if you're in a browser interface to read the information on the browser page, the image information, but it just isn't that functional. If you are paying for a textbook, you need to actually have access to that material. And I'm sorry, but that's an issue for sure.
Yes, I totally agree with that, Linda. And we had a further comment from Will that he concurs with what we were just discussing. That's his understanding as well. And Cindy is just adding a comment, finding publishers not willing to give PDFs. They want students to use Red Shelf and Vital Source. Again, not bringing an alternate format discussion, pros, cons, or anything to do with that into this discussion now, but I would encourage people to keep an eye on the Network of Assistive Technologists website, because we're trying to put something together to help individuals navigate the publisher landmine. I don't know how else to describe it in summary. So I just want to bring this session to a close here, and as I fight with Zoom here, I apologize. I think that there's a whole new language out there actually that's coming with our new world, this remote education and such. That's going to include things like fighting with Zoom and Zooming and that, and I'll be interested to see how many of those things that us as assistive technologists, if any of the wording that we've created appears in the new versions of dictionaries. So anyways, again, Linda, thank you very much for sharing your infinite amount of knowledge and wisdom today and taking us through the features, the lesser known features of Kurzweil. And for Will and Iain, respectively, you're sharing the information with us and helping answer the questions and being here to support both the Kurzweil product and the Canadian distributor of Bridges Canada. I appreciate your time and encourage any of our participants or members, as well as the assistive technology community as a whole, to reach out should they be looking for any support that either Iain or Will can provide. So thank you for joining us today, and just remember, you can't spell education without AT.
Okay. Thanks, Doug, for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Take care.